Have you ever witnessed someone walk into a room and instantly command attention without uttering a single word? They don't demand respect. They don't plead for acknowledgement. They simply exist in their own space, and somehow everyone else begins to orbit around them. What if I told you that this magnetic presence isn't born from charisma or confidence, but from something far more profound? It comes from mastering the art of being unreachable. Picture this scenario. You stop chasing conversations that drain you. You stop explaining yourself to people who never intended to understand. You stop being the person everyone turns to when they need emotional labor, but disappears when you need the same. What happens next might shock you. The world doesn't collapse. Instead, it rearranges itself around your newfound boundaries, and those who claim to care about you reveal their true intentions through their reactions. When you become strategically unreachable, you're not playing games. You're reclaiming something that was always yours, but somehow got lost in the noise of other people's expectations. You're taking back your power. Carl Jung understood this deeply when he wrote about what he called the process of becoming whole. He knew that sometimes, to find yourself, you must first lose everyone else's version of you. Think about the last time someone made you feel small, insignificant, or emotionally exhausted. Now ask yourself this question. How much of that power did you hand over willingly? How many times did you say yes when every fiber of your being screamed no? How often did you explain yourself to people who had already made up their minds about you? Every time you did this, you were teaching the world that your boundaries were negotiable. But here's what Jung discovered through decades of studying the human psyche. The people who irritate us most, who trigger our deepest reactions, are often showing us something about ourselves we're not ready to see. When you become unreachable, when you stop reacting to every provocation, you force others to confront their own shadows. And most people are not prepared for that level of self-examination. This isn't about becoming cold or heartless. This is about recognizing that your emotional availability has become a currency that others spend freely while never making deposits into your account. You've become an emotional ATM, dispensing comfort, validation, and support to anyone who approaches with the right combination of neediness and manipulation. But what happens when the ATM goes offline? The desperate start to shake the machine. They press buttons frantically. They complain to management. They can't understand why their usual methods aren't working. And in that desperation, they reveal who they really are. Not friends, not lovers, not family members who genuinely care about your well-being. They're users who panic when their supply is cut off. Jung called this phenomenon projection. But it goes deeper than most people realize. When you're constantly available, you become a blank screen onto which others project their unresolved needs, their fears, their insecurities. They don't see you. They see a function, a role, a solution to their internal chaos. And as long as you keep playing that role, you'll never know who you really are beneath all those expectations. The moment you step back, the moment you become unreachable, the projections start to crack. People begin to see glimpses of your authentic self, and for many, this is terrifying because your authenticity demands theirs, and most people would rather live in comfortable illusions than face uncomfortable truths. You were not born to be everyone's emotional support system. You were not designed to carry the weight of other people's unprocessed feelings. You were not created to be a solution to someone else's emptiness. Yet somewhere along the way, you learned to believe that your worth was measured by how much you could give, how much you could endure, how much you could sacrifice for others' comfort. This belief system is a trap. It's a sophisticated form of self-abandonment disguised as virtue. But here's the revolutionary part. The moment you recognize this pattern, you can break it. The moment you understand that being unreachable is not about shutting people out, but about letting the right people in. everything changes. When you become selective with your energy, your time, your attention, you're not being mean. You're being intentional. Carl Jung spent his life studying what he called individuation, the process by which a person becomes psychologically whole and distinct from the collective unconscious. This process requires periods of withdrawal, moments of solitude, times when you must turn away from the world's demands and listen to your own inner voice. But our society has taught us to fear this solitude, to fill every moment with noise, connection, and external validation. What if solitude isn't something to fear, but something to embrace? What if being unreachable isn't about isolation, but about selectivity? What if the very thing you've been avoiding is exactly what you need to reclaim your power? When you become unreachable, you're not disappearing. You're becoming more present, but only for what truly matters. You're not being antisocial. You're being discerning about which social interactions deserve your energy. You're not being selfish. You're finally being self-aware enough to recognize that you can't pour from an empty cup. The people who get angry when you become unreachable are revealing something crucial about your relationship. They're showing you that they valued your availability more than your well-being, your function more than your feelings, your service more than your soul. And while this revelation might be painful, it's also liberating. Think about the last time you felt truly at peace. I'm willing to bet it wasn't during a heated argument, defending your position to someone who had no intention of understanding. It wasn't while explaining yourself for the 100th time to someone who kept asking the same questions. It was probably during a moment of quiet, when you were alone with your thoughts, free from the constant pressure to perform, please, and provide. That peace you felt, that's your natural state when you're not being pulled in every direction by other people's expectations. That calm, that's what becomes available when you stop making yourself available to everything and everyone. That clarity, that's what emerges when you create space between yourself and the chaos of constant connection. But let me be honest with you about what this journey requires. Becoming unreachable demands that you disappoint people. It requires that you let others think you've changed, that you've become difficult, that you're not the same person they used to know. And they're right. You're not the same person. You're becoming who you were meant to be before the world taught you to be someone else. This transformation isn't comfortable. There will be moments when you question whether you're doing the right thing. There will be times when the silence feels heavy, when the solitude feels overwhelming, when you wonder if you've pushed away people who genuinely cared about you. But these moments of doubt are part of the process. They're the growing pains of someone learning to stand in their own truth. Jung understood that every process of psychological growth involves what he called a death and rebirth. The old version of yourself, the one who said yes to everything, who explained endlessly, who carried everyone else's emotional baggage, that version must die for the authentic you to emerge. And death, even psychological death, is never easy. But what's born from this process is something extraordinary. A person who knows their own worth, not because others validate it, but because they've discovered it within themselves. A person who can be present in relationships because they choose to be, not because they're compelled by guilt or fear. A person who commands respect, not by demanding it, but by respecting themselves so completely that others have no choice but to follow suit. When you master the art of being unreachable, you discover that the right people will always find a way to reach you. The relationships that matter will survive your boundaries. The connections that are meant to last will deepen when you stop making yourself shallow and available to everyone. But the relationships that were built on your availability, your constant giving, your endless flexibility, those will dissolve. And that's not a loss, that's a liberation. Your energy is not unlimited. Your emotional capacity is not infinite. Your time is not expendable. These are precious resources that you've been giving away as if they were worthless, but they're not worthless. They're the most valuable things you possess, and it's time you started treating them as such. The art of becoming unreachable is really the art of becoming valuable, not because you make yourself scarce, but because you finally recognize your own worth, not because you withhold yourself from others, but because you stop withholding yourself from yourself, not because because you become cold, but because you stop letting others determine your temperature. This is not about building walls. This is about building boundaries. This is not about shutting people out. This is about letting yourself in. This is not about becoming antisocial. This is about becoming authentically social, connecting with others from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than compulsion, from love rather than fear. Carl Jung once said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When you become unreachable, you'll discover who in your life gets irritated, who becomes desperate, who starts to manipulate or guilt trip you back into your old patterns. These reactions aren't about you, they're about them. They're revealing their own dependence on your availability, their own discomfort with boundaries, their own inability to respect your right to choose how you spend your energy. The most profound relationships in your life will not be threatened by your unreachability. They will be enhanced by it, because when you show up for someone from a place of choice, rather than obligation, from fullness rather than emptiness, from authentic desire rather than guilty compliance, your presence becomes a gift rather than a given. But here's what you need to understand about this journey. It's not a destination, it's a practice. Every day you'll be faced with opportunities to slip back into old patterns, to become overly available, to explain yourself to people who don't deserve your explanations. The art of being unreachable is the art of catching yourself in these moments and choosing differently. Some days you'll choose your peace over proving your point. Some days you'll choose silence over defending yourself. Some days you'll choose solitude over toxic companies. And with each choice, you'll become more sovereign over your own life, more authentic in your relationships, more present to what truly matters. The world will try to convince you that this is selfish, that you're being too much, that you're expecting too much, that you need to be more understanding, more flexible, more available. The world profits from your availability. The world benefits when you don't know your own worth. The world functions more smoothly when you carry everyone else's emotional burdens. But you are not here to make the world's job easier. You are here to live your own life, to fulfill your own purpose, to become who you were meant to be. And sometimes that requires disappointing others. Sometimes that requires being misunderstood. Sometimes that requires walking alone until you find people who can walk alongside you without expecting you to carry them. The art of becoming unreachable is ultimately the art of becoming reachable to yourself. It's about creating enough space in your life to hear your own voice, to feel your own feelings, to want your own wants without the constant interference of other people's needs and expectations. When you master this art, you'll find that you attract different people into your life. You'll magnetize those who respect boundaries, who value authenticity, who understand that real love doesn't require the sacrifice of self. You'll repel those who only wanted to use you, who confused your availability with love, who mistook your compliance for caring. This is not a punishment for them or a reward for you. This is simply the natural consequence of becoming who you really are. This is what happens when you stop betraying yourself to keep others comfortable. This is the result of choosing yourself not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. If you've made it this far in this journey of understanding, you're already different from who you were when you started. You're already questioning patterns you once accepted, examining relationships you once took for granted, considering possibilities you once dismissed. This is the beginning of your individuation, your journey toward becoming psychologically whole and authentic. The path ahead isn't easy, but it's yours. The relationships you'll build moving forward will be based on mutual respect rather than mutual need. The love you'll experience will be chosen rather than demanded. The peace you'll find will be earned through the courageous act of becoming unreachable to everything that doesn't serve your highest good. So I ask you now, as you sit with these ideas, as you feel the stirring of recognition in your chest, as you glimpse the possibility of a different way of being in the world. Are you ready to disappoint some people in order to stop disappointing yourself? Are you ready to be misunderstood by those who never tried to understand you? Are you ready to become unreachable to everything except your own truth? The art of becoming unreachable isn't about shutting the world out. It's about finally letting yourself in. And once you master this art, you'll discover that the right world will always find its way to you, but more importantly, you'll have found your way back to yourself. If this message resonates with something deep inside you, if you feel the call to reclaim your energy and protect your peace, write in the comments below. I choose my authenticity over their approval. Let's see how many souls are ready to embark on this journey of becoming beautifully, powerfully unreachable. But let me share with you something that Jung discovered in his deepest explorations of the human psyche, something that will help you understand why this journey is not just important, but essential for your psychological survival. Jung found that every person carries within them what he called the collective shadow, the accumulated darkness of humanity's unexpressed emotions, unacknowledged desires, and disowned aspects of self. When you remain constantly available to others, you become a repository for this collective shadow. People unconsciously dump their unprocessed anger, their unexpressed grief, their unacknowledged shame onto you because you've made yourself available to receive it. You become what Jung would call a scapegoat, carrying the emotional burdens that others refuse to bear. This is why becoming unreachable feels so threatening to others. It's not just that they lose access to your energy and support, it's that they lose their dumping ground, their emotional waste disposal system. When you withdraw your availability, they're forced to carry their own shadow, to face their own darkness, to process their own emotional material. And for most people, this is terrifying. Consider the friend who only calls when they're in crisis, who disappears when you need support, who somehow always manages to make every conversation about their problems. This person isn't consciously manipulating you, though the effect is the same. They've unconsciously identified you as someone who will absorb their shadow material, their unprocessed emotions, their psychological waste, and you've unconsciously agreed to this role because somewhere deep inside, you believe that carrying others' burdens makes you valuable, needed, loved. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. When you carry someone else's shadow, you lose access to your own light. When you absorb others' unprocessed emotions, your own emotional clarity becomes clouded. When you make yourself available to everyone else's psychological material, you become unavailable to your own inner wisdom, your own intuition, your own authentic desires and needs. This is why the journey of becoming unreachable is ultimately a journey of shadow work, of reclaiming the parts of yourself that you've given away to maintain relationships that were never truly reciprocal. It's about recognizing that your empathy, while beautiful, has been weaponized against you by people who refuse to develop their own emotional intelligence. The process of individuation that Jung described isn't just about becoming your authentic self, it's about becoming whole, which means integrating both your light and your shadow, owning both your gifts and your limitations, accepting both your strengths and your wounds. But you cannot do this integration work if you're constantly processing other people's psychological material. You cannot become whole while serving as a fragment in someone else's psychological puzzle. When you begin to withdraw your availability, when you start to become unreachable, you'll notice something extraordinary happening. The emotional fog that has surrounded you for years begins to lift. The confusion that has plagued your decision-making starts to clear. The exhaustion that has become your constant companion begins to fade. This isn't a coincidence. This is what happens when you stop absorbing other people's shadow material and start reclaiming your own psychological space. But the process isn't without its challenges. As you become less available to others' projections, you'll be forced to confront your own shadow, the parts of yourself that you've been avoiding by staying busy with other people's problems. You might discover anger you didn't know you had, sadness you've been suppressing, needs you've been denying. This confrontation with your own shadow is uncomfortable, but it's also liberating, because only by owning your shadow can you truly own your light. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the transcendent function, the psychological mechanism by which opposites are reconciled and new consciousness is born. When you become unreachable to others' projections, you create space for this transcendent function to operate in your own psyche. You begin to reconcile the part of you that wants to help with the part that needs to preserve itself. You integrate the aspect that seeks connection with the aspect that requires solitude. You merge your desire to be loved with your need to be authentic. This integration doesn't happen overnight. It's a process that unfolds over months and years as you learn to navigate the tension between availability and boundaries, between connection and autonomy, between service and self-preservation. But with each choice to honor your own needs, with each decision to protect your energy, with each moment of choosing your peace over proving your point, you become more psychologically integrated, more emotionally mature, more spiritually whole. The people who resist your transformation most strongly are often those who have been benefiting from your psychological fragmentation. They've grown accustomed to having access to your light while contributing to your shadow. They've become comfortable with relationships where you absorb their darkness while they bask in your brightness. When you begin to change this dynamic, when you start to become unreachable to these one-sided exchanges, they'll often escalate their behavior, becoming more demanding, more manipulative, more emotionally volatile. This escalation is what Jung would call a shadow projection. Unable to face their own darkness, they project it onto you, accusing you of being selfish, cold, difficult, or changed. They're not wrong about the change part. You have changed. You've stopped being a receptacle for their unprocessed emotions. You've ceased being available for relationships that drain you while never replenishing you. You've begun the courageous work of becoming psychologically whole rather than psychologically fragmented. Understanding this dynamic through Jung's lens helps you see that the resistance you encounter isn't really about you. It's about others' unwillingness to face their own shadow material, their own unprocessed emotions, their own need for psychological growth. Your transformation forces them to confront aspects of themselves they'd rather avoid, and most people will choose comfort over growth every single time. But you are not most people. If you've come this far in understanding, if you've resonated with these ideas, if you felt the stirring of recognition as I've described these patterns, you're someone who chooses growth over comfort, authenticity over approval, wholeness over fragmentation. You're someone who understands that true love, whether romantic, familial, or friendship, cannot exist in relationships built on psychological imbalance and emotional parasitism. The art of becoming unreachable is ultimately the art of becoming psychologically sovereign. It's about recognizing that you are not responsible for processing other people's emotions, healing other people's wounds, or filling other people's voids. You are responsible for your own psychological health, your own emotional well-being, your own spiritual growth, and sometimes protecting that responsibility requires disappointing people who have grown comfortable with your self-neglect. This sovereignty doesn't make you cold or unloving. In fact, it makes you more capable of genuine love because you're no longer loving from a place of depletion and desperation. When you become unreachable to those who would drain you, you become more available to those who would nourish you. When you stop absorbing others' shadow material, you become a clearer channel for light and healing in the world. The relationships that survive your transformation into unreachability will be fundamentally different from the relationships you had before. They'll be based on mutual respect rather than mutual need, on conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion, on genuine care rather than guilty obligation. These relationships will nourish rather than drain, inspire rather than exhaust, elevate rather than diminish. But perhaps most importantly, your relationship with yourself will transform. No longer will you be a stranger to your own needs, desires, and boundaries. No longer will you sacrifice your own well-being for the comfort of others. No longer will you mistake self-abandonment for love or emotional martyrdom for virtue. You'll begin to treat yourself with the same care, respect, and consideration that you've been giving so freely to others. This transformation is what Jung called the opus contra naturam, the work against nature. It goes against your natural inclination to please, to avoid conflict, to maintain harmony at all costs. It requires you to develop what Jung called a ruthless compassion, toward yourself, the willingness to protect your own psychological well-being, even when it disappoints others. As you embark on this journey of becoming unreachable, remember that you're not just changing your own life, you're contributing to the collective healing of humanity. Every time you refuse to absorb someone else's unprocessed emotions, you're forcing them to develop their own emotional intelligence. Every time you maintain a boundary, despite pressure to dissolve it, you're modeling healthy relationship dynamics for others. The world needs people who are psychologically whole, emotionally sovereign, and spiritually integrated. The world needs individuals who can love without losing themselves, who can give without depleting themselves, who can be present without sacrificing themselves. By becoming unreachable to what drains you, you become infinitely more reachable to what matters most. The transformation begins now. The question is, are you ready to begin?